Ladies and gentlemen, certainly. Here's an introduction written in the distinct, calm, and reflective style of Shi Heng Yi for your motivational speech titled Watch This before June 27, 2025. Shi Heng Yi reveals God's final warning: there comes a time in life when silence begins to speak louder than noise, when the winds do not move the trees, yet something within us begins to shift. You may not understand it with the mind, but you feel it deeply. Something is calling you to awaken. This message is not meant to scare, but to prepare. It is not about predicting doom, but about pointing you back to a truth that has always been there, waiting for you to remember. Before June 27, 2025, something will change, not necessarily in the outer world, but in your inner world, if you are ready. This is not about dates, but about destiny, and destiny doesn't knock twice. The final warning from God is not thunder from the sky. It is the quiet urge in your heart that says, return, return to presence, return to simplicity, return to the path that you were meant to walk. Most will ignore it, some will resist it, a few will listen. There is a moment in every person's life when a quiet internal alarm begins to ring, not loud, not chaotic, but persistent. This alarm doesn't come from the outside world. It isn't triggered by external circumstances. It is something much deeper, a calling from within that tries to bring your attention back to what truly matters. Most people go through life asleep. They move from one task to another, one distraction to the next, never questioning the deeper direction of their lives. But the inner alarm clock doesn't care about your schedule, your goals, or your daily routine. It begins to ring when your soul can no longer accept the gap between who you are and who you were meant to be. It starts subtly, a sense of discomfort when you're around certain people, a feeling of emptiness even after success, a restlessness at night that cannot be explained. These are not random feelings, they are signals, and like any alarm, they grow louder the longer you ignore them. The more you drown them out with noise, social media, constant talking, entertainment, distractions, the more you become numb to the very thing trying to wake you up. The challenge is that this inner alarm does not speak in words. It speaks in sensations, in silence, in a gentle unease. So many miss it because they expect warnings to be dramatic. They expect the sky to fall or something external to shake them awake. But the real danger is not outside, it is within. The danger of becoming disconnected from your essence. The danger of trading meaning for comfort. The danger of wasting time waiting for a perfect moment that never arrives. People spend years chasing after things, money, titles, approval, without realizing they've abandoned the very source of peace. When the inner alarm starts ringing, it's not telling you to achieve more, it's asking you to remember. Remember your discipline. Remember your stillness. Remember your purpose. The moment you begin to listen, your life starts to change. You start noticing the patterns you once ignored. You see how often you lie to yourself just to avoid discomfort. You begin to observe how busy the mind is, how much energy is lost trying to impress, to control, to please. Awareness is the first step in answering the alarm, becoming aware of your breath, becoming aware of your thoughts, becoming aware of the state of your soul. The more you tune in, the more you begin to feel the tension between your current life and the life you are called to live. This tension is not a problem, it is the invitation, but you must stop numbing it. You must stop pushing it away. Those who ignore the inner warning signs eventually feel lost. They wake up one day and don't recognize who they've become. But those who listen, those who honor the message, begin to live differently. They walk lighter, they speak with more purpose. They stop reacting and begin responding. They no longer need constant validation because they are rooted in something deeper than opinion. They have started to hear what cannot be heard with the ears. The whisper of the spirit that says, wake up. That whisper is not new. It's been calling you for years, through your pain, through your doubts, through the stillness that you've been too afraid to enter. But now the alarm is louder, and it's not coming from fear. It's coming from love, the kind of love that refuses to let you remain asleep while your soul yearns to rise. Time is a concept that most people take for granted. We believe there is always more of it, more time to fix things, more time to change, more time to become the person we know we should be. But this belief is one of the greatest illusions of the human experience. It seduces us into delaying the most important decisions, convincing us that tomorrow is guaranteed. It tells us that we can afford to wait, that transformation can be scheduled, that awakening can be postponed until it feels more convenient. But the truth is, time waits for no one, and the soul doesn't follow the calendar. Each day that passes without intention is a silent agreement with stagnation. Every hour spent in distraction is time stolen from your purpose. When you wait, you're not just delaying action. You are slowly weakening your inner fire. That spark within you that wants to grow, that wants to expand, that wants to live fully, it begins to fade every time you ignore it. The illusion of time creates a false comfort. It tells you that you can ignore your pain, your calling, your conscience, because there will always be another chance. But no one is promised another moment. Life is not obligated to keep presenting the same door. Many people will wake up one day and realize that the opportunity they had is no longer there. The relationship they neglected has ended. The health they took for granted has declined. The inner strength they ignored has withered. And in that moment, they will realize that their waiting was not wisdom. It was fear in disguise. Procrastination is not laziness. It is often the expression of fear masquerading as patience. The fear of failure, the fear of discomfort, the fear of responsibility. And so we say not yet, but with every not yet, we fall deeper into sleep. To awaken is to see that now is the only time that exists, not yesterday which cannot be changed, not tomorrow which may never come, but now. This breath, this choice, this moment, this is where power lives. This is where transformation begins. The illusion of time robs you of that power by convincing you that the door is always open. But the longer you hesitate, the harder it becomes to step through. The longer you live without discipline, the more difficult it becomes to regain control. The longer you live without stillness, the more foreign peace feels to your nervous system. Every spiritual tradition, every great teacher, every awakened being has pointed to the same truth. The present moment is sacred. It is the only place where change is possible, where freedom can be found, where the divine can be heard. But to live in the present requires courage, the courage to face what is unresolved, the courage to feel what you've been avoiding, the courage to take action without knowing the outcome. Time, as we think of it, is not a friend to the unconscious. It is a mirror, constantly reflecting who we are choosing to be, and when we look deeply, we may not like what we see, but the mirror is not there to shame us. It is there to reveal, to awaken, to remind us that each passing day is not just another number. It is a reminder of what's at stake. Your life, your purpose, your inner peace. The longer you wait, the more you risk forgetting what it even felt like to be aligned, and in that forgetting, something sacred begins to die. The divine warning is not thunder from above. It is this quiet realization that the time you thought you had is slipping through your fingers, and the only way to reclaim it is to stop waiting and start becoming who you are meant to be. In a world constantly demanding your attention, silence has become a rarity and distraction a way of life. Every second, there is something calling you away from yourself, a screen lighting up, a notification buzzing, another opinion flooding your thoughts. You live in an age where being busy is mistaken for being important, and constant movement is seen as progress. But amidst all the noise, there is something sacred that is being lost. That sacred thing is the connection to the divine voice within. It does not scream. It does not compete. It whispers, and in the chaos of modern life, that whisper is drowned out by the endless chatter of the world. Distraction has become an addiction. People no longer sit with their thoughts. They fill every gap with sound, every silence with noise. But the truth is, the answer they seek are not found in more information, they are found in less. The path back to clarity does not come through consumption, it comes through detachment. Detachment not from life itself, but from the noise that clouds your perception of it. When the mind is constantly occupied, it becomes impossible to feel the subtle movements of the soul, and without that connection, life begins to feel hollow, no matter how full it looks on the outside. The divine does not compete for your attention, it waits, patiently. It waits for the moment you become quiet enough to listen, still enough to sense, and humble enough to receive. That is why the first step toward awakening is not learning more. It is unlearning the habits that keep you distracted, unlearning the lies you've accepted as truth, unlearning the idea that your value comes from what you achieve or how others see you. When you begin to detach from the noise, you start to see clearly. You realize how much of your energy has been spent trying to prove, trying to control, trying to fit in. But the soul is not meant to fit in. It is meant to break free, and it cannot break free while chained to constant stimulation. You must learn to disconnect, not from life, but from the artificial version of life that has been built around you. This disconnection is not isolation. It is returning to your center. It is finding the place within you that is untouched by the world's chaos. That place exists in all of us, but few visit it, not because it is far, but because it requires something the modern world does not teach: discipline, patience, and inner stillness. You cannot hear the divine message if your mind is always reacting. You cannot feel the presence of truth if your heart is always racing. To receive the final warning, the soul must be quiet enough to perceive it. The warnings do not always come in obvious forms. Sometimes it is an overwhelming tiredness. Sometimes it is a persistent feeling of misalignment. Sometimes it is the breaking of something you thought was essential. These are not punishments, they are messages trying to guide you back to what matters. But if you are too distracted, you will misinterpret them. You will see them as problems instead of portals. The most dangerous form of blindness is not the inability to see with the eyes, but the refusal to look within. And yet, the world teaches you to look everywhere else. At others, at trends, at goals, at opinions. It rarely tells you to look into your own silence, but it is there that the real answers wait. Detachment is not about removing yourself from life. It is about seeing life clearly without the filter of fear, comparison, or noise. It is only in that clarity that there is a sacred power in stillness, a depth that cannot be accessed through movement or noise. The modern world has trained people to associate stillness with idleness, to see silence as a void that must be filled. But the opposite is true. In stillness, things arise that are hidden during motion. In silence, truths emerge that were once buried beneath the constant sound of life. Most people avoid stillness not because it lacks value, but because it reveals too much. It confronts them with everything they've suppressed, everything they pretend not to see. Yet it is in this confrontation that awakening begins. The sacred pause is not about doing nothing. It is an act of deep attention. It is stopping long enough to notice the subtle movements within you, the breath, the emotions, the thoughts, the patterns that run your life. It is creating space where clarity can emerge. When you are always moving, you don't realize how much of your life is a reaction to pressure, reaction to fear, reaction to expectation. But in stillness, you begin to see the space between stimulus and response. And in that space is freedom, the freedom to choose a new way of being, the freedom to align with something higher than your habits. Many people say they want transformation, but they avoid the stillness where transformation begins. They want change without discomfort, insight without reflection, peace without the inner work it requires. But you cannot hear the divine whisper through the storm of constant motion. The sacred pause is what allows that whisper to rise. It is the silence before the answer, the emptiness before the revelation. It is not a void, it is a womb where understanding is born, but to enter it requires humility. It requires you to stop performing, to stop pretending, to stop running. It requires you to sit with your truth, even if it is uncomfortable. In the pause, the ego loses its grip. It can no longer hide behind achievements or distractions. In that moment of stillness, you begin to feel what is real. You see the pain you've been carrying. You recognize the disconnection between your words and your actions. You notice the fatigue in your soul from trying to be someone you're not. These revelations may feel heavy, but they are sacred. They are the beginning of healing because you cannot release what you have not yet acknowledged. You cannot transform what you refuse to see. The sacred pause is also where divine warnings are received, not in a dramatic voice from the sky, but in a subtle shift inside, a sense that something must change, a feeling that you are not in alignment, a realization that time is moving and you are not. These inner signals are not to be dismissed. They are guidance, they are reminders, they are the voice of something greater than you calling you back to your essence. But to hear them, you must slow down, you must sit, you must listen not with your ears, but with your heart. In stillness, your priorities begin to realign. What once seemed urgent becomes irrelevant. What once seemed trivial becomes essential. The sacred pause reveals the difference between what is important and what is merely loud. It brings you back to what truly matters, your integrity, your purpose, your connection to the divine. This is not a mental understanding, but an embodied knowing, a wisdom that arises not from thinking, but from being. And the more you practice this pause, the more familiar it becomes. It starts to weave itself into your daily life, reminding you to return again and again to the present, where truth lives. There is a path that every human being is meant to walk. It is not always visible, and it rarely follows the map that society lays out. This path is not paved with comfort or convenience, but with clarity and alignment. The deeper truth is that many have strayed from this path, not out of rebellion, but out of forgetting who they are, forgetting what they came here to do, forgetting the sound of their own soul. Life is full of demands, responsibilities, and distractions that slowly pull people away from their center. And the further you move from that center, the more disconnected and restless you become. Walking the path of alignment is not about achieving something new. It is about returning to something ancient, something you already know deep inside. Alignment is the state where your thoughts, your actions, your emotions, and your spirit all move in the same direction. It is when you speak with truth, act with purpose, and live with presence. But to walk that path requires honesty. It requires looking at your life and asking, where have I compromised? Where have I settled? Where have I lost the thread of my own story? Most people live with a quiet tension inside them, and knowing that they are meant for more, not in the sense of success or fame, but in the sense of depth, meaning, and presence. That tension is the soul trying to guide you back. It is not punishment, it is invitation, but it often gets ignored because the world rewards performance, not authenticity. It celebrates speed, not stillness. It values appearances more than alignment. So the path becomes obscured, not because it disappears, but because the noise gets louder than the inner compass. Returning to alignment requires courage. The courage to leave behind what is familiar but false. The courage to say no to the things that drain your spirit. The courage to say yes to the things that nourish your soul, even if they don't make sense to others. Alignment is not about pleasing people, it is about honoring truth, and truth does not always make you popular. It does not always fit into expectations, but it sets you free, it liberates you from the weight of pretending, it frees your energy from the exhaustion of trying to be someone you are not. The first step on the path is awareness. Awareness of what is no longer serving you. Awareness of the choices that keep pulling you away from peace. Awareness of how often you betray your own values just to belong or to be accepted. Once you become aware, you cannot go back to sleep. Something inside you begins to rise, a deeper voice, a wiser voice, one that says, this is not the way, one that points gently back to the path you once knew but lost sight of. This voice does not yell, it does not threaten, it simply reminds you of who you are beneath the roles, beneath the masks, beneath the noise. To walk in alignment means to live with integrity, even when it's hard. It means choosing presence over performance, depth over distraction, intention over impulse. It means building a life not from fear, but from faith, not blind belief, but deep inner trust. The trust that you are guided, the trust that your soul knows the way, the trust that returning is always possible, no matter how far you've strayed. But the longer you delay, the heavier the cost, not in money or reputation, but in inner peace. The longer you remain out of alignment, the more you feel fragmented, more you begin to forget what it feels like to be whole. The path is not outside of you, it lives within, and every moment you choose to listen, every moment you choose to pause, every moment you choose to act in harmony with your truth, you return. You return not to something new, but to something eternal, something that has always been waiting for you to remember. There comes a point when life places before you a choice that cannot be avoided, a moment where the soul stands at a crossroads and must decide whether to continue the path of distraction or to step into the deeper truth that has always been calling. This moment does not arrive with fanfare or dramatic signs. It comes quietly, often disguised as discomfort, dissatisfaction, or a subtle realization that the life being lived is not the one that was meant. The final opportunity is not marked by a date on the calendar. It is marked by the internal shift that says, I can no longer pretend. Many wait for a perfect time to make changes, believing that someday they will be ready. But readiness is not a feeling, it is a choice, and often the window of opportunity is far narrower than imagined. There is a grace period in which the divine keeps knocking, keeps whispering, keeps placing signs along your path, but this grace is not infinite, not because the divine runs out of love, but because life itself is moving, energy is shifting, and what is available now may not be available later. Doors open for a time, but eventually they close, not to punish, but to protect the sacred timing of growth. This final opportunity is not about fear, it is about responsibility, the responsibility to honor the truth you already know, the responsibility to no longer delay the work your soul came here to do. You have been given signs, through people, through experiences, through intuition. You've been shown glimpses of who you could become if you were willing to let go of what holds you back, but the mind hesitates, it clings to what is known, it seeks safety in routine, and yet safety is not the same as peace. Comfort is not the same as alignment. Familiarity is not the same as truth. At a certain point, the cost of staying the same becomes heavier than the fear of change. You begin to feel the weight of unexpressed potential. You sense the pain of all the things left unsaid, all the dreams abandoned, all the strength that remains unused. This is the warning, not a warning of punishment, but of potential loss, the loss of connection to your deeper self, the loss of a life that could have been lived in full presence and purpose. The final opportunity asks something of you. It asks for commitment. It asks for focus. It asks for the courage to step into the unknown, not with certainty, but with trust. There is no external force that will do the inner work for you. No one can walk your path. No one can embody your truth. That is your sacred task. The invitation is to awaken, not just intellectually, but in your choices, in your habits, in your relationships, to stop living a life of reaction and begin living a life of alignment. The final opportunity is not given to frighten, but to awaken urgency, not panic, but presence, to help you realize that time is not the enemy, but a teacher, and the lesson it brings is simple. Your life is happening now. If you ignore this inner calling, it does not disappear. It becomes a quiet ache that follows you, a restlessness that seeps into your days. But if you respond, if you say yes to what you've been avoiding, something begins to change. Life meets you with new clarity, doors open, energy returns. You begin to remember what it feels like to be alive, not just breathing but truly awake. But to reach that state, something must be left behind, the version of you that settled, the version of you that compromised, the version of you that waited too long. The final opportunity is not about adding more to your life. It is about removing what no longer serves. It is about simplifying, shedding, and returning to the essence of who you are. There is a reason the message is reaching you now. There is a reason the timing feels significant. There is a reason your heart stirs when you hear these words.